Greetings. My name is Brad Guhr. I'm the education coordinator at Dyck Arboretum of the Plains at Heston College. And as a 39-year-old Arboretum, we have a mission to cultivate transformative relationships between people and the land. I'm excited to be here on this side of the podium, giving this convocation after many years of attending Convocation in the late 80s and early 90s as a Bethel student. So we're going to discuss connecting to a sense of place on the Kansas Plains. I was a nerdy kid in Mound Ridge in the 70s and 80s as I was really unaware of the prairie legacy that existed around me in the South Central Kansas region. Was basically covered by wheat fields around the area. But I learned more about that prairie legacy as I went on to Bethel College and started studying more about botany and environmental studies and learning about the prairie at the Coffin Museum and understanding the importance that prairie played in this area. I also really enjoyed that time at Bethel College, pursuing a liberal arts degree and playing soccer and just taking in the whole experience at Bethel College. Met my future spouse there, Sarah Friesen. We moved on to St. Louis, where we served a term for 2 years of Mennonite voluntary service and practiced some of the jobs that we might have as we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do with our careers. That led us to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And at UW-Madison, I studied landscape architecture and ecological restoration as I pursued more of this interest in learning about the prairie that was so important in Kansas region. And so as we moved closer to home, we came to the Kansas City area, and I got my first job there with an environmental consulting firm, Burns & McDonnell, where we did site assessments for any kind of engineering projects that would take place on the landscape, with the main goal of trying to make sure that we were protecting natural areas as much as possible in that process. In the process, we had these two sons. Henry is a junior that is attending Eastern Mennonite University this fall, and Ben is a junior at Newton High School. So this story that we're going to be talking about here takes place in the plains of the central part of the United States, spanning from the Dakotas in the north all the way to Texas in the south. And it is right just North Newton, and Bethel is located right in the middle of that zone. So as part of the culture that took place in these plains with the Mennonites coming over in the 1800s and bringing with them this turkey red wheat that they wanted to use to start a new life and to make a living on the plains of Kansas as they escaped religious persecution. They were implementing what they knew how to do best, which was grow crops and especially this turkey red wheat. So they brought with them the knowledge of the threshing stone, which is the iconic feature of Bethel College. And that gave way around 1900 to more technology and that was built into the threshing machine that really started to perfect more of this process of separating the wheat from the chaff. And that after 1920 eventually gave way to the combine. But this process of establishing on the plains, building a sense of place, carried on with the start of Bethel College in 1887 and the finishing of the iconic limestone administration building that is sort of a beacon on the plains at that time, and it's still an important figure on campus. The Bethel College Church was built in 1956, which followed about 60 years of worship in the administration building chapel, where those services took place. And another nod to the history of the Mennonite farmer that came onto the plains can be found in the Mennonite sculpture statue that was finished in 1941. It resides in Athletic Park, where Bethel played its football games for many years before moving to Thresher Stadium on campus. So this story of turning the prairie with the plow and being able to cultivate these crops of wheat was a very important one for the story of the Mennonites settling on the plains. It was important to their economy, and it was a part of their cultural story as well. But along with growing wheat, agricultural systems were expanded to include corn and milo, and all three of these species are in the grass family. You have the legume or the soybean family, which produce soybeans and alfalfa. This is an important family that fixes nitrogen into the soils that benefits the plants around them. And then you have the iconic sunflowers of Kansas. So these three families, the grasses, the legumes, and the sunflowers, very much represent many of the agricultural crops that benefit, that we benefit from and that grow well on the plains today. The economic legacy that has led to has been very important in Kansas. We are in the top 3 of wheat production in the country, as well as beef production on the prairies that you see across Kansas. And none of this would have been possible without the important preceding of the native prairie that existed here for thousands of years, about 10,000 years since the last ice age. And this prairie legacy is due in part to these deep root systems that these perennial grasses and wildflowers had beneath them. The overturning or the regeneration of those roots year after year helped develop these really friable, organic, rich, nutrient-rich soils down to a depth of 10 feet or more. And those amazing soils that developed over thousands of years of soil presence are why we are able to grow crops in this place almost better than any place in the world. And it's why Kansas is identified as the breadbasket of the world. So a little bit more about the prairie and what makes up that prairie. Let's think about the plant families, the grasses. The grass family is represented by a number of common species, including the tall grasses of big blue stem and switchgrass and Indian grass, some of the mid-height grasses of 2 to 3 feet tall, of little blue stem, and side oats, grama, and June grass. These make up about 50% of the biomass of the prairie. Not only are they important foods for the grazers like the bison and the cattle that follow them, but they're also an important fire-prone matrix that carries fire through the prairies, that regenerates the prairies, keeps trees from invading, and it's a very important part of the renewal process in the prairie. Another very prominent family of plants is the legume family. This is purple prairie clover. There are many others that are also represented in this species of this family. And then you have the sunflowers. Not only the many different sunflower species, but you have coneflowers, and you have echinacea, and you have liatris, and you have black-eyed Susans. You have so many different, and the sunflower family represents the most number of species in the prairie. So these 3 families of the grasses and the legumes and the sunflowers, with their prominence, it makes complete sense. And it's no surprise that the agricultural crops that come out of those families as well, why they do so well here. So in much thanks to the legacy of the prairie. So why is Kansas a prairie state? Why do we see the prairies throughout this Great Plains ecosystem? Well, it's because of this Rocky Mountain feature that's right on the western edge of the Great Plains. The Rocky Mountains shape the moisture regime that you get through the Great Plains, and that comes from the Pacific Ocean generated storms that move across the western United States, that run into the Rocky Mountains, and as they go over those Rocky Mountains, they lose most of their moisture and rainfall and precipitation over the Rockies, and as a result, you have this lack of rain or this rain shadow. And that has shaped the precipitation on the plains for thousands of years. And so you see that in the precipitation map. Western Kansas only gets about 8 to 10 inches of rainfall. In the central part of the state, close to North Newton, you get maybe 20, 30 inches of rainfall. And then in the eastern part of the state, as you get away from that Rocky Mountain rain shadow, and you get more influence of the Gulf warm, moist air masses coming from the south and the dry, cold air colliding with those systems, creating more storms and bringing more moisture as you move away from the Rockies. It's why you see this increasing precipitation map as you move from west to east. And as you might expect, that shapes the vegetation that we've had historically in Kansas as well. A little bit of rainfall translates to short grass prairie in western Kansas. A little bit more rainfall, mixed height grass prairie. The dark green there is the tall grass prairie, 5, 6, 7 tall grasses. And then oak ecosystems in the eastern part of the state. Very much that correlation between rainfall and height and density of vegetation. Another interesting element of this connection to place is thinking about the much more ancient history of Kansas. So it was roughly about 85 million years ago, Kansas was covered by this deep ocean. And they had sea creatures like these predatory mosasaurs, 15-foot long creatures being eaten by things like sharks. Those really happened in Kansas. And it's a really, I think, a fascinating story. And you can see that still today, where this ancient sea existed over much of kind of the western part of Kansas. In the western chalk rock country, where you see limestone layers, which are the result of deposition of millions of years of bones of fish and shark's teeth and all kinds of those things separating out to the bottom of the ocean and creating this layer cake of geology that you see in these limestone features. Really an interesting feature today, and the paleontologists really love studying that western Kansas for that reason. The story continues with the physiographic map of Kansas. Those chalk rock features I just talked about are in the high plains and the Smoky Hills of western Kansas. You get the Flint Hills, that rocky substrate just to the east of us that helps preserve prairie there. And then you have the Wellington McPherson lowlands where North Newton and Bethel College exist. It didn't have the same rocky substrates that you saw all around us. And as a result, these soils were easily tilled and converted to agriculture. So that's why you don't see many prairies right around the Newton area. And you see mostly, agricultural crops. But that's all kind of builds into that story of Kansas and its history. Another element of the interesting natural history of Kansas is that we're an important part of the Great Plains Flyway. The birds that migrate from north to south every year, to South America, and then coming back in the spring from south to north all the way through there. So go within about 2 hours west of Newton and you will find Cheyenne Bottoms and Quivira Wildlife Refuge, where the migration of tens of thousands of geese in one visit, and thousands of sandhill cranes is really a spectacle to see and a really cool part of being in Kansas. Another cool story is the monarch butterfly migration. That happens all the way from Mexico up to Canada and back every year through this corridor you see between the white lines that follows the line of the historic prairie. And the reason that takes place through that area is that one of the plants that is a major part of that prairie ecosystem is milkweed. And that is the host plant for the monarch butterfly. Monarchs lay their eggs on milkweeds. Those eggs hatch. The caterpillars feed on that as they grow and turn into a chrysalis and form those adult monarch butterflies that are going to continue that migration journey. And since it takes about 3 to 4 generations of monarchs to make that distance from Mexico to Canada and back, the milkweeds in the prairie are such an important piece of that story. So you have this cool natural history of the prairie and all the plants and the amazing root systems that have developed these soils, creating this agricultural legacy that we have here. And those support lots of biological diversity. The more plants you have in that base, the more animals it supports, creating that diversity. And you have this interesting cultural history that has developed on the plains for thousands of years as well. You know, earlier Quivira Indian cultures, as in the top left slide there, is can be found in the evidence of the archaeological history that you see in the southern Kansas Ark City area, where the Quivira Indians were living happily in these places. They were feeding off of massive herds of bison. They were getting their tools and their furs and their clothing all from those bison. They were also making use of the food plants like purple poppy mallow and its big potato-like root that you see second from the right. And then the prairie wild onion on the far right there. Prairie garlic too. Many different foods that you would find on the prairie very easily. And you have plants on the far left like purple coneflower, echinacea, where the seeds or the roots, when you chew on them, can have a deadening effect of your teeth or make your mouth go numb. An important medicinal plant on the prairie. And some of that information was also passed along to the early European settlers too. And you know, the Mennonite immigrants that came through and came into Kansas and learned how to subsist on the prairies as well with their sod houses and making a living through agriculture eventually. So next going to move on to vocation and how this basis of this agriculture and prairie legacy has been built into my career and what I see as my calling going forward, which is a vocation. It's an occupation to which a person is especially drawn or for which they are suited, trained, or qualified. And it is something that we're going to spend our entire lives doing. It's helpful to see it as more than just a job, more than just getting a paycheck. It has to be something that drives you and that you're passionate about. And that leads me to 3 words that I'm going to be using as a guide for inspiration for you. They've been helpful for me, and I use this image of a life preserver or a personal flotation device. That PFD, I'm adapting that acronym to be passion, a foundation in education, and diversity as a guideline for us in how I've had some success in my vocation, and maybe how you can find some success as you move forward finding your vocation as well. These have been important in helping me stay afloat in my pursuits, and so I hope that you will find some kind of inspiration in them as well. So first, passion. It's about loving what we do, and we spend a lot of time in our lives pursuing our jobs, our careers, our vocations. And I've calculated that after you graduate until retirement, generally you're going to spend about 43 years. And at 52 weeks per year and 40 hours per week, that comes out to about 90,000 hours that you will be spending pursuing your vocation. So you better like what you're doing and enjoy it. And for me, in my pursuits of an environmental studies career, following what I studied at Bethel, I knew that conserving green spaces and being inspired by the natural areas out there was something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life and to teach other people about that. And so studying places like the Tetons in Wyoming or Yellowstone National Park, the Boundary Waters forests of the upper Midwest, the Rockies in Colorado, the beautiful streams of the western United States, taking up fly fishing, floating the streams of southern Missouri, the National Scenic Riverways, or northern Arkansas. The Ozarks are a great and inspiring place, as well as the redwoods of northern California and the chalk rock features of western Kansas. But ultimately, it was the prairie that I knew was home for me, that I wanted to study, I wanted to conserve, I wanted to restore, I wanted to teach other people about it and inspire them about it as well. So that is where connecting to my sense of place was most important. So after passion, I think that foundation, building an education, building different levels of expertise through your volunteer experiences, through your internships, through your jobs, through your education, is so important to kind of building that, that foundation for what going forward. For me, it was in environmental studies, it was studying a number of different topics, including chemistry and physics, statistics, botany, ornithology, the study of birds, entomology, the study of insects, soils, and bringing a lot of these together to study ecology and the study of ecosystems. All came together to help build my foundation in going forward and providing some expertise to lean on as I pursued my vocations and jobs in this area. And you will find for your pursuits and your field that you will know certain core classes that can help bring you that expertise as well. Diversity. Diversity is so important in many aspects of your life, and diversity that I'm going to touch on, it adds interest, it adds flexibility, and it adds resiliency to you as you go forward in pursuing your vocation. So in a nutshell, diversity is good. And diversity can be seen in the places that we live, the natural environments around us. So here on the prairie with lots of different plants, that translates to different diverse trophic levels and more biological diversity up higher when you have a broader base and more diversity at the base. That translates to more stable soil. It translates to cleaner air that we breathe and the water that we drink. And it also translates to healthier food systems where we live. So the ecological systems where you live matter, and diversity is important for those systems. Educational systems. So as you're pursuing your liberal arts degree at Bethel College, having a broad base can be so critical. As you study the arts, the humanities, the social sciences, the mathematics, the natural sciences. So even though you're going to have a focus area, as I showed before, that I had as well, don't limit yourself to just those areas and get as broad a base as possible. Because it adds interest to your life, and it's going to make you a more well-rounded person, and it's going to make you more flexible as your career pursuits shift and change over time. People. Surrounding yourself with diverse people can only improve your lives, in my opinion. And it's that exposure to a diversity of cultures that adds variety, perspective, and empathy to our lives. Experiences, what we do when we're not pursuing our particular jobs and careers, and what we do in our free and leisure time can be filled with experiences of many different foods and games and books, movies, how we play, how we exercise our minds and our bodies. When you add diversity to that approach, it makes us only healthier and more interesting and more vibrant. Politics. So politics is something we get into. This can be a vexing topic at times and frustrating, but it's so important to engage in that process. As you find your voice and your vote and become more engaged in this area, I encourage you to not get too focused and narrowed in your view of that. Stay out of echo chambers. And don't just limit what you get in your news and social media feeds. So I encourage you to get a diversity of perspectives that help us gain understanding and empathy for other people as well. I'm going to finish with how I've taken these elements of passion and a foundation in education and diversity of approaches to the one capstone activity that I do regularly in my job that feeds me and makes me enjoy my job so much. And that's this Earth Partnership for Schools program. Well, we have learned that over time, children are losing a connection to the natural areas around them. They are losing touch with the wild places, and in that process, as they lose that connection, it affects their mental well-being as well as their physical well-being too. So our program Earth Partnership for Schools tries to address that. And we do that with getting kids outdoors, helping teachers restore prairie gardens on school grounds, and helping them engage their kids in that process is all part of this program. And it ends up being a lot of fun for them as well, as they get outdoors, they exercise their minds and their bodies, they do fun, hands-on, project-based learning in the process. They get more environmental literacy, because these are going to be the environmental decision makers of the future. So that is an important process as well. And they practice a stewardship of the natural environment around them. And they do so with a diverse curriculum that helps them study math and social studies and the arts and music and sciences, all from this process of engaging in the natural elements of their school landscapes. And not only do the kids benefit, but the school grounds do as well. It adds biological diversity, it adds aesthetic interest, and that's all part of this program as well. So we've been able to train almost 300 teachers from almost 90 schools during the last 14 years. And it's certainly been something, as it is for the teachers, for me, of an important process of connecting to a sense of place here on the plains. So I hope that you have something you can find inspiring in this little talk today. I want to welcome you to Bethel College on the Plains as you connect to a sense of place. I want you to put on your PFD and develop your vocation while you are here.